So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about Hawaii's Environmental Court, and then Judge Crabtree will tell you what it's really like to be in the courtroom, and then we'll kind of get back on track and definitely have time for your questions. So Hawaii's Environmental Court. This picture here, if you can recognize some of the characters in the picture, there's David Sakota, who's the man in the middle holding the law. The Governor Ige, what classroom were they in? Yeah, right here. So that's actually not signing the environmental court law, but that's signing the asset legislation, which we talked about earlier today. But there are a lot of people involved in passing the environmental court. You're going to meet some of them. But a lot of effort since the bill has actually been passed to tweak it, to increase the toolkit, and to kind of change the way we work on enforcement issues here in Hawaii. So one slide, lots of pictures kind of say it all. We have a conservation, what I would call a conservation imperative in Hawaii, and I know a lot of you face the same issues. One of the ways I like to say it is we just don't have time to lose. I challenge all of us to name a resource that's getting better. So we need to do a better job with conservation enforcement in Hawaii, and the resources here and in your jurisdictions are too important, too precious to lose. We are extremely fortunate. We have a very strong cultural foundation here in Hawaii, which is just getting stronger. We're very fortunate to have a Center for Native Hawaiian Law here at the law school that we partner with extensively. Some of these issues have already come up today. It is such a strength of ours to be able to incorporate that into all of these efforts in the environmental court as well. The threats, name your threat, right? Little fire ant, mosquitoes, climate change, sea level rise. We have hit tourism Hawaii. Who wants to guess how many million tourists come to Hawaii now? What's the new level that we've hit? 10 million. Unbelievable. What's the population of Hawaii? 1.4. Unbelievable, right? It's, and we love our visitors. I should say So the threats keep coming. DLNR, you've already heard this, but I'll say it again because this is my new campaign. DLNR is terribly underfunded. They have a huge mandate, double the budget of DLNR. Can I just keep saying that until it's true, Carlton? Double DLNR's budget. Can we all say it together? Double DLNR's budget. Thank you. I'll tell Suzanne. The environmental court came out of an unfortunate history where enforcement cases were not sticking in court. So despite the incredible effort of the community or the officers who initiated them, officers would take them through prosecutors, go to court, and for whatever reason, there are a variety of reasons, they weren't sticking. So actually the difficulties that DoCare faced in having their cases disposed of properly by the court was one of the main motivators, but there is a big backstory too. And we've talked before a little bit about the enforcement chain, and there's so many pieces to the enforcement chain, and they all have to be strong and work together. So the environmental court is one way to strengthen the enforcement chain. There was actually 12 years, more or less, of grassroots lobbying to get the environmental court in Hawaii. And it was actually inspired by municipal court, by Judge Potter in Tennessee, and picked up by Keep America Beautiful, Keep Hawaiian Islands Beautiful. It's a Maui-based grassroots effort to get an environmental court in Hawaii. And that eventually combined with kind of other NGOs here in Hawaii, and finally, I think, got some institutional recognition by the DLNR and by the courts that the time had come, and by the legislature, and I would particularly think Senator Gabbard and Representative Chris Lee. And eventually, the legislation passed in 2014, and I actually think, it was a surprise to a lot of people who were working on environmental court that it passed. It was a bit of a surprise. One of the reasons why I think it did pass was DoCare. DoCare had been in the news a lot, not always favorably, despite their best efforts. And this was one way to address some of the issues related to the capacity at DoCare. So let's just say that in addition to the noisy, positive conversations that the grassroots groups raised for years, and largely thanks to the women and some of the people in this photo, there's John Dapitan from Maui, who is like this one woman force of nature who is behind this, Marty Townsend from Sierra Club, Randy Awo, our former chief of DoCare, Senator Mike Gabbard, and Representative Chris Lee. So all of that was critical, but I have to say there were some very important quiet conversations with Chief Justice Rechtenwald, who's on the right, who convinced him that the judiciary should change its testimony from years of opposition to the environmental court to support. If you have the judiciary saying we don't want an X court or a Y court, it's not going to happen. We know our legislature. The Chief Justice, I give him a ton of credit, saw some of the issues, particularly with DoCare, and the judiciary's testimony changed, and that was one of the key factors that made it happen in 2014. The legislature, not quite knowing what it had unleashed, put a one-year stay on the effectiveness of the court, so the effective date was delayed a year so there could be a working group to study whether or not there needed to be changes before it actually was implemented. That turned out to be a good thing, and I mentioned earlier we talked about the importance of a long conversation sometimes and not just jumping ahead. Justice Mike Wilson, who's pictured there, was co-chaired the working group, and that working group for a year kind of studied, well, not for a year because they had to report to the legislature, for about 3 or 4 months, went around and had a lot of meetings and studied the issue of the environmental court and decided to recommend no change to the legislation and deliberately just kind of let it happen. The reason I have pictured here on the bottom right, don't pay attention to me, but the other gentleman there, that is Justice Swatantra Kumar, who is the chairperson of India's National Green Tribunal. India, one of the largest, is it the largest? One of the largest nations in the world, 1.4 billion people, I think. And they have these are rough numbers, but I think I'm remembering 1.4 million lawyers. That's the number of people we have in Hawaii. We are extremely fortunate to have partnered with the National Green Tribunal in helping us get our environmental court up and running. I mean, we are so blessed. He's come several times. He actually was here in Hawaii. He videoed in for the first training of our environmental court judges before the court was even effective. We had the training several weeks before the court was even launched. So what is the environmental court? It's real judges who have environmental court docket on top of their other responsibilities. And I'm going to race through this because I want to share with you some of the challenges. So they have e-dockets. How does it work? The statute that was passed by the legislature lists all the different statutory areas that are put into the environmental court bucket. Note, it does not include land use or zoning. Vermont had the first environmental court in the country. Theirs is a municipal land use and zoning court. Ours is natural resources court. Court cases are flagged as e-court cases. When they're filed, either civil or criminal, they get the little flag or check. Then they're designated to, or they're sent to the designated dockets of those judges that are recognized as environmental court judges. The environmental court judges receive biennial training. Biennial means, I had to relook it up, right? It's every other year that we're doing the training. It's not that frequently because there are no resources for the court. That's my last point there. There are no resources allocated for this court. That's probably one of the reasons why the legislation passed, right? But tip, empty vessel, you can fill it. Easier than asking for a huge budget and a huge infrastructure. I again point to the National Green Tribunal. I've been there twice. They have a courthouse. They have 3 courtrooms in their main. They have green upholstery. They have a logo. They have resources. They have courts all over the country. And we're very teeny, but we are getting started and we're making progress. So to fill in some of that capacity gap, the law school is very honored to participate with the judiciary in any kind of training that they need. This is Judge B.B. Richardson, who was one of the leaders of the first several years of the environmental court, district court, and Judge Jeanette Castanetti, who partners with Judge Crabtree and myself in keeping the environmental court going, and she's officially, I think, still a working group chair. So we wanted to expand the toolkit for this environmental court. It's been mentioned by several fellows. I won't go over it again, but the civil resources violation system that diverts cases from court is something that the judges really want to get the small fish out of court. So it's like a traffic ticket. As that system develops, it will help take some of the smaller cases out of the busy judge's docket. The judges asked us for alternatives to the criminal penalty, so we were so fortunate. That was that first photo to have the governor sign that bill, which allows for community service and for education courses. Fun fact, Judge Trudy Senda on Hawai'i, when we told her, this is great, we have this new legislation that allows you to sentence offenders to community service. And I don't know if any of you know her, she's quite a firecracker. And she said, well, I've been doing that for years. So Kauai had gotten it right for many years without explicit authority, but basically putting offenders back in the community to work off. And sometimes, as Luna said, sometimes it's more expensive to them than the fine. This past session, successfully, we were able to remove just vanilla parking violations from the environmental court jurisdiction, and I can share the numbers with you later, but they kind of just clog up the system. I won't go through it now, but there's good statistics we can share with you, but statistics don't tell you the real story, and that's why Judge Crabtree is here. So there's district court statistics are quite large. If you can see the top line, there's several thousand cases a year that go through the either statutory or administrative. Those are the ones that Ian has to try to keep track of. He's our only law fellow tracking those violations. At the circuit court level, let me just go back. There are fewer cases, but as Judge Crabtree will tell you, they are big cases, and they last a lot longer. And that also, the circuit court has jurisdiction over environmental felonies. So, as I close up, what are the needs of the court? We need more concentrated dockets. It's too spread out, in my humble opinion. We definitely need to train the prosecutors more, and Ian is focused on that, but we have prosecutors on each county that need training, need a dedicated prosecutor for what's called vertical prosecution. I think we need staff for the court itself, and that ask is going to be made. We need training funds for judicial education. Now it's being done kind of on the good graces of the existing training budget, which is not big enough. We need dedicated law clerks, public outreach. We need to tell the stories of the environmental court. Statistics don't tell the story. And we need funds for the judges to travel elsewhere. And let me say on the right-hand side, I'll introduce you to this new institution. It's called the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment. Some of you know I'm very, very active with the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and that subset is the World Commission on Environmental Law, which has formed a new global network of judges who either are interested in environmental issues or on environmental courts. And Judge Crabtree is coming to a conference in a week. We're going to Washington, D.C. to work with U.S. judges from several chief justices of several state courts, and also EAB, Environmental Appeals Court Board judges, administrative law judges from EPA, and connect them to this global community. So there's lots of stories we can tell. The middle one, those little beautiful fish, or something that Judge Crabtree might talk about. Cane burning was the first case that was filed in the environmental court on Maui. Surprise, right? The Maui people were like filing within seconds after the court was effective. They were ready to go. This is a case we can talk about later about the slaughter of albatross on the North Shore and how that ended up in the environmental court, in the circuit court, because it involved a felony. This is Judge Castanetti sentencing that defendant to jail time, but also community service.